My dear friends, good afternoon and welcome. We are very privileged to have Cardinal William Leveda with us, and I have already introduced Archbishop Vigano, the Holy Father's personal representative. We are delighted to have Archbishop Nienstedt and Bishop Evans, who are the co-consecrators, two of Bishop Robert Deeley's classmates who are celebrating their 40th anniversary this year, and many of them have joined us for the celebration here today. We welcome all of the archbishops and bishops, Bishop Deeley's brothers, Father Kevin, Tom, Paul, and John, and their spouses and children. We are very delighted to have Metropolitan Methodius and other representatives of the ecumenical community here, Reverend Laura Everett from the Massachusetts Catholic Conference, the Honorable Michael Lonergan, the Consul General of Ireland in Boston, Ambassador and Mrs. Flynn, Mayor Joseph Sullivan of Braintree, and so many representatives of the clergy of Boston and visiting clergy, along with deacons, priests, seminarians, relatives, and friends of Bishop-elect Deeley. Welcome. It is a delight to have all of you here on this very joyful occasion. I often muse that I was ordained on the feast of the beheading of John the Baptist. And so I'm always very jealous when other people are ordained on more appropriate feast days, like this wonderful feast day of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, our first American saint, whose very first spiritual director before she entered the church was our own Bishop Jean-Louis Chevreuse, the first Bishop of Boston. And so I'm sure that she is interceding for our new bishop and all of us today. In 1992, we were celebrating the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival to the Virgin Islands, islands that Columbus named in honor of Saint Ursula and the 11,000 virgins. Commemorative stamps to mark Columbus's arrival on St. Croix were issued by the United States and by Italy, Columbus's native land. The head of the Italian Postal Services attended the ceremonies on St. Croix and was quite taken by the natural, unspoiled beauty of the place, the white beaches, the palm trees, the crystal clear blue water. He said to me, "Your Excellency, you have chosen a beautiful place to be bishop." I said, "Sir, I haven't chosen anything. The Holy Father sent me here." To which he replied, "Il Papa è infallibile." The Pope is infallible. Well, many of our priests, I fear, would be quick to point out, unfortunately, papal infallibility does not extend to the naming of bishops, and could probably give many egregious examples to prove their point. However, today we are most grateful that our beloved Holy Father, Pope Benedict, has wisely named this excellent priest to be our auxiliary bishop. In so doing, the Holy Father is not naming a stranger, but one of his own collaborators who work closely with him. Monsignor Robert Deeley is a man whose priestly spirituality, pastoral zeal, and keen intellect prepare him well for the office of bishop. In today's world, the office of bishop is not well understood. One man was quoted as saying the only bishop he knew was on his chessboard. Indeed, one of the traditional chess pieces is shaped like a mitre and called the bishop. I shall not give any mystical interpretation to the diagonal movement of that chess piece. One chess manual urges the reader to use the bishop sparingly, saving him for heroic deeds in the end game. Well, we are expecting many heroic deeds from our new bishop, and not just in the end game. St. Teresa of Avila, who was a great fan of chess, saw in this game a metaphor for our spiritual life. She says the goal of our spiritual life, like chess, is to capture the king. In our quest to capture the king, the role of the bishop is crucial. One of the most important things the Catholic Church does is to make bishops who can link us to the apostles and to Christ himself, and who allow us to be a Eucharistic people. And without the Eucharist, how sad this world would be. I know that many here would adhere to the cry of the martyrs of Abitina, who told Diocletian, Sine Domenico non possumus. Without the Sunday Eucharist, we could not survive. Christ founded the church on the apostles, the first bishops. Mostly, they were simple fishermen, ill-prepared for the task that Jesus gave them. But they became vessels of clay, bearing treasures, who carried the good news of the gospel to the ends of the earth, witnessing to the truth of their preaching by gladly shedding their blood in witness to the gospel. All of us are acquainted with Da Vinci's portrait of the Last Supper. Today's gospel gives us St. Luke's portrait of the Last Breakfast. Our feckless fishermen apostles who had toiled the whole night and caught nothing. But now the risen Lord has arrived and everything changes for the better. Peter hastened to put on all of his clothes and then jumped into the water because the beloved disciple had declared, "It is the Lord." When Peter reached the shore, he found Jesus cooking. This is the only instance where the scriptures hint at Jesus' culinary prowess. Obviously, the Blessed Mother gave Jesus a few tips in the kitchen. Certainly, Jesus had learned from his mother that the fresher the fish, the better. In Fall River, a Portuguese housewife will routinely ask a fishmonger what time the fish was caught. And the first thing that Jesus says to Peter is, "Bring me some of the fish that you just caught." So Peter throws himself back into the sea, swims to the boat. Then he drags the net to land with 153 fish, and still the net does not break. Scholars have produced many volumes speculating on the mystical meaning of the number 153. Some have related that number to the various parts of the Torah. St. Augustine, on the other hand, surmised that 153 is the triangular of 17. That means if you add up all the numbers decreasing from 17, 17 plus 16 plus 15 plus 14, etc., you will reach a total of 153. But you know what I think it means? Not to gainsay St. Augustine, but I think it means there were actually 153 fish in the net. My dad was a great angler, and when he returned from a fishing expedition, he could always tell you how many fish he caught, at what time, and how much they weighed. I often joke that Peter was a lousy fisherman and that he caught nothing unless Jesus was right there saying, "Throw the net here, now." But actually, Peter was a real fisherman and would have kept track of how many fish he caught. At the beginning of the gospel, after the first miraculous draught of fishes, Peter says to Jesus, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Jesus does not depart, but instead he calls Peter to be a fisher of men. Approximately 3 years later, at the end of the Gospel, comes today's story. It's déjà vu all over again. Another miraculous draught of fishes, and St. Peter's profound sense of unworthiness. Yet just as at the beginning of the Gospel, Jesus invites Peter saying, "Follow me," spiritual writers often speak of a second calling, which is a profound grace and a deepening of our personal conversion. Our response to the first call can often be romantic, self-seeking, and shallow. The response to a second call is characterized by purification, greater humility, and a greater dependence upon God's grace. Today's gospel is definitely Peter's second call. If the first time Jesus calls Peter, Peter felt unworthy, imagine how the apostle felt now, having denied that he even knew Jesus. And what is worse, Peter denied knowing Jesus, not to a soldier with a long knife, but to a waitress with an attitude. That bonfire by the shore of the Sea of Galilee is a reminder of the bonfire in the courtyard of the high priest, where Peter denied the Lord, hears the cock crow, and where Jesus turns and looks at Peter in the face. The gospel records that Peter went out and wept bitterly. The sight of the Master's face bathed in blood melted Peter's heart. Peter had done what all of us have tried to do at some point in our lives. Namely, he tried to follow Jesus at a safe distance, but he discovered that that is not possible. The invitation is to follow, an invitation to follow up close, to embrace the cross. At the last breakfast, Peter is standing before the risen Lord. Peter must have looked like a drowned rat, soaking wet, having jumped into the sea twice to swim ashore and then to swim back and bring in the fresh fish. Peter was wet, he was cold, tired, but mostly he was ashamed of the 3 times he denied Jesus. Jesus gives him the opportunity to erase those denials, asking Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" John of the Cross says that at the end of our life, we will be examined in love. That's all that really matters in today's gospel. Jesus is being examined. Jesus is examining Peter in love. At Caesarea Philippi, Peter makes his confession of faith. At the Sea of Tiberias, Peter makes his confession of love. The triple denial of Jesus by Peter destroyed the close relationship that Peter had with his master. Peter was then absent from some of the most significant events of the gospel. The royal lifting up of Jesus on the cross, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judiorum. The foundation of Jesus' new family of God, behold thy mother, behold thy son, and the gift of the Spirit, emissit Spiritum. All of these events have been marked by the presence of the beloved disciple and the absence of Peter. The denials must be overcome. And in the rhythmic repetition of the question, "Do you love me?" there's almost a hint of reproach. You once denied me. Are you sure of your relationship to me now? Peter's embarrassed but honest response led to Christ's acceptance of Peter's confession of love and the establishment of a new relationship. Peter is charged to shepherd and feed Jesus' flock. Peter's identification with the Good Shepherd must prepare him to make his own the words of Jesus. I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. I lay down my life for my sheep. I have other sheep, but there will be one flock and one shepherd. Peter's love for the Lord must manifest itself in the way that he loves Jesus' flock, the church. His profession of love is followed by a solemn prediction about Peter's future, his laying down his life for the flock. Peter's commitment to the way of the Good Shepherd is also associating him with the meaning of Christ's death. For Peter's unconditional acceptance of his role as shepherd of the sheep of Jesus will also lead to the glorification of God in his self-gift in love unto death, when a rope will be tied around him and he will be led where he would rather not go. After examining Peter in love and charging him to feed the flock and to lay down his life, then Peter is invited by Jesus once again with those words that echo through the history of the church: "Follow me." The invitation is to follow Jesus, not as Peter did when he fled from Gethsemane and tried to follow at a safe distance. But now Jesus invites Peter to follow up close in unswerving discipleship all the rest of his days. Jesus is teaching us that all ministry is about love, about laying down one's life for the flock, and that ministry is born out of a deep friendship with the risen Lord. Peter and the apostles lived out their vocation, feeding Christ's flock and confirming the faith, making the Good Shepherd's love present to God's people. The gifts of ministry did not end with the apostles, but have been passed on by the laying on of hands and the gifts of the Spirit. Today, in our presence, Robert Deeley will receive the same ordination and share the apostles' role. Jesus is calling this man to follow him and to be a shepherd after his own heart. By this sacrament, the power and love of the Good Shepherd and the gifts of the Spirit are made available to believers of every age. Without bishops in the lineage of the apostles, there would be no priests, no magisterium, no power to forgive sins, no possibility of Eucharist. That is why the Church sees the ordination of bishops as the key to our identity as Catholics. It's the way that Christ's loving plan is continued throughout history. Our bishops are ordained by bishops to fulfill the mission Christ has given us to teach, to sanctify, and to lead. The ordination ceremony speaks to us about the meaning of the sacrament. The rite calls for the ring to be placed on the new bishop's finger. It is a wedding ring. Indeed, the Spanish word for the bishop's ring is esposa, which means the bride. The bishop represents Christ, the divine bridegroom, and is to love the church entrusted to him as his bride. The bishop's ordination contains many phrases that this aspect of being wedded to the church. The bishop, like the bridegroom and father of the family, must have a special love for God's people. Bishop-elect Robert, the homily and the ritual and the questions directed to the candidate for ordination speak to us about your role. You are told to pray always for and with your people, as a father and brother, to love those whom the gospel places in your care. Love the priests and deacons who share with you the ministry of Christ. Love the poor and infirm, strangers and the homeless, and seek out the sheep who stray. And most importantly, you must guard the deposit of the faith, entire and incorrupt, as handed down by the apostles. You are to bear witness to the truth of the gospel. Remember Christ's words to the apostles: "Whoever listens to you listens to me, and whoever rejects you rejects me, and whoever rejects me rejects the one who sent me." Along with the mitre, a wedding crown, you will be given a staff, the bishop's crozier. You are to be an icon of the Good Shepherd. Be like the Good Shepherd who knows his sheep and is known by them, and who does not hesitate to lay down his life for them. You will be ordained a bishop in the apostolic succession by the same laying on of hands that ordained that cloud of witnesses, Matthias and Timothy, John Chrysostom, Patrick and Augustine, Boniface and Denis, Charles Borromeo, John Fisher, John Carroll, Jean-Louis Lefebvre de Chevreuse, Oliver Plunkett, John Newman, Joseph Vincenti, Fulton Sheen, Richard Cushing, James Walsh, Oscar Romero, Francis Von Tuan, bishops in the apostolic succession, called to be one in the College of Bishops, in union with Peter, to proclaim the Catholic faith with one voice, to be witnesses of the resurrection, to be spiritual fathers and shepherds. Bishop Robert, whenever you look back on this day, recall the charge of Paul to Timothy. I remind you to stir into flame the gifts of God that you have received through the imposition of hands. For God did not give you a spirit of cowardice, but rather of power and love and self-control. Bear your share of the hardship of the gospel with the strength that comes from God. And remember always that your ministry is above all a call to follow Christ. You responded generously 40 years ago by embracing a vocation to the priesthood. Today is a second call. Like Peter, you're being called to a deeper conversion, to a vocation of love and service. We commend your ministry to the loving care of Mary, the mother of the divine shepherd, that through her intercession and the grace of this ordination, God may grant you a heart according to the heart of Christ, who came not to be served, but to serve, and to lay down his life for his flock.